The creak of the floorboards on the back porch is the first sound I hear every morning. It's woven into the fabric of my life just as tight as the smell of strong black coffee and the distant rumble of the first train passing 5 miles out. This house, every board and every nail, remembers the warmth of Martha's hands and the weight of my work boots. We built it together, back when the future seemed as endless as the prairie sky. Martha's been gone 6 years now, but the creak remains. Sometimes on quiet evenings I figure it's her way of grumbling, reminding me it's about time I tightened those boards, but I don't touch 'em. That creak is the only thing that answers me in this empty house. At 68, I stopped expecting handouts from life a long time ago. 42 years in the heat and hell of the all-state mechanical shop, where the air was thick with the smell of hot metal and machine oil, burned every last illusion out of me. I learned to believe not in words, which the wind carries away as easy as cottonwood fluff, but in things, solid, dependable things, things that are built to last, parts that don't fail you. After I retired, my world shrank to the size of this house and the old garage, but the principles stayed the same. It's just that instead of factory machines, now I had my workbench, and instead of production orders, I had a never-ending string of requests from Sarah, my daughter, and Leo, my grandson. My life revolved around him, fixing some newfangled plastic robot that fell apart an hour after he opened the box, assembling a giant construction set that Mike, Sarah's husband, couldn't get his head around, lost as he was in the clouds of his digital startups, building a model of the solar system for the school science fair, and not just any model, but one with planets that actually turned, for which I had to take apart an old record player. I never said no. After Martha passed, I found my purpose, my footing, in that chaos of small chores. "Frank, your hands can't be idle," she used to say, laughing. "They're either building something or breaking something out of boredom." She was right, and as long as I could build things for Leo, I felt alive. Everything I did for his smile, to make sure that in his shifting, uncertain world, there was something steadfast, someone steadfast. Sarah called last night. Her voice on the line was rushed, as always, full of things to do, and a faint guilt she always felt when she was about to ask for something. "Dad, hi, you didn't forget about the open house tomorrow, did you? Leo's presenting his history project. He's a nervous wreck. Please, can you come support him? Mike's out of town again on business, and I'll be running around like a chicken with my head cut off, from work to the school and back." I chuckled to myself. If I'd known that in my old age I'd become the on-call grandpa, I'd have bought myself an Airstream instead of a house and just hit the road. "Course I'll come, honey. Where else would I be?" "Thanks, Dad. You're the best. You're a saint." In the morning, I put on my best shirt. Not new, but clean and pressed. My old, butt-solid jeans. Boots that had walked more miles than I could count. I started up my old Ford F-150. The engine roared like a grizzly waking up from a long sleep. I'd bought this pickup new back in '98 and had since rebuilt it, I think, down to the last bolt. It was a part of me. Old, dependable, and a little tired. On the drive, I looked at the town. Everything had changed. The old hardware store where I'd bought my first set of tools was now a shiny sushi bar. The little family-owned shops had been replaced by faceless chain stores. The world was becoming plastic, disposable. And the people in it, it seemed, were too. The schoolyard was buzzing like a kicked-over beehive. The air was thick with the smell of dusty textbooks, chalk, popcorn, and kids' sweat. Squeezing through the crowd of frantic parents with their smartphones out, I felt like a dinosaur at a tech convention. Finally, I found the gymnasium. It was filled with tables displaying kids' projects, papier-mâché volcanoes, dioramas with little plastic cowboys and Indians, posters of presidents, and in the middle of it all, I saw him. Leo. He was standing with his back to me at his station, talking animatedly with a buddy of his. On his table stood our castle. 3 weeks of work. I had turned the turrets on my old lathe. Together, we had cut and glued the crenellated walls from thick cardboard, which I'd specially primed and painted to look like old stone. I'd stayed up half the night wiring tiny LED lights into the arrow slits so they'd flicker like torches in the dark. The first time I switched them on, Leo had gasped. "Grandpa," he'd whispered, "it's magic." I didn't want to interrupt him, didn't want to steal his thunder, so I hung back by a neighboring table with a lopsided volcano on it, pretending to be fascinated by its crater. I could hear their voices. "Whoa, Leo, that's an awesome castle," his friend said, his voice full of admiration. "Did you make it yourself?" "Nah," Leo answered. "Me and my grandpa did. He helped me." I felt a warm wave of pride wash over me. I was about to walk over, give him a smile and a wink. But then the friend asked, gesturing vaguely in my direction, "That guy over there, is that your dad?" A pause hung in the air. It only lasted a second, but for me, it stretched into an eternity. In that pause, I heard his hesitation. He didn't know how to introduce me, how to define my place in his world, in front of his friends. And then he found the words. Simple words. Casual. Tossed out as easily as you toss a piece of trash. "Oh, him?" Leo waved a hand in my direction without even turning around. "That's just my grandpa. He's kind of like my handyman. You know, the guy who just fixes things." The guy who just fixes things. The words weren't a shout. They were a quiet, cold click, like the sound of the most important part inside you breaking clean in two. The buzz of the gym, the laughter of children, the drone of voices, it all suddenly faded, becoming flat and distant, like a picture on an old television. I looked down at my own hands, hands with grime worked so deep into the skin it would never wash out, with gnarled knuckles and a roadmap of fine white scars. Hands that had rocked his cradle, hands that had carved his first wooden horse, hands that had built the very castle he was now taking credit for. And all of it, my whole life, all my love, all my care, had been boiled down to a simple utility. I wasn't a person. I was a function. I was a screwdriver, a hammer, a wrench, a nameless tool you pull out of a box when you need it and toss back in when the job is done. I didn't go over. I didn't say a word. What was the point? Make a scene? Blame a kid for just repeating what he'd learned to be true? That would be pathetic. I turned around. Slowly, as if in a dream, I walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. No one even glanced my way. I was a ghost, an old man in a clean shirt, invisible at someone else's party. Outside, the bright sun cut my eyes. I got in my pickup and just sat there for a long time, staring blankly at the school gates, listening to the happy noise spilling out. The engine roared to life, and I drove home. A cold cup of coffee was waiting for me on the porch, along with a deafening, all-consuming silence. And I knew, in that moment, that something had broken today that I would never be able to fix. Back home, the first thing I did was rip off that best shirt. It was choking me. I changed into my armor, old oil-stained jeans, and a faded flannel shirt that smelled of the house, the workshop, my whole life, and I went to the garage, my kingdom, my sanctuary, But today, I walked in not as a king, but as a trespasser. The air, thick and familiar, steeped in the sense of sawdust, welding ozone, and good old WD-40, felt suffocating today. I wandered between the machines, touching the cold steel, and I didn't see just tools. I saw ghosts. This lathe here. I bought it with my first bonus after I made shop foreman. Martha had grumbled about me spending good money on hunks of iron, but her eyes were dancing. She knew how much I wanted it. On this lathe, I'd turned the legs for Sarah's crib. On this same lathe, I'd made Leo his first baseball bat. And these vices, bolted to the workbench for all time, they were my father's. He was a man who could fix anything, too. The most important thing about a man, Frank, he used to say, tightening a bolt, is that his hands know what they're doing. Words are for women and politicians. I'd lived my whole life by his code. And where did it get me? To being the handyman type. I walked over to the old metal cabinet in the corner, pulled out the top drawer, the sacred one. There, under a stack of old blueprints, wrapped in a soft rag, it lay. A small wooden car, carved from a single block of maple, smooth, polished to a mirror shine, warm to the touch. On the hood, I had carefully burned 4 letters. Leo. A gift for his 5th birthday. I remember that day down to the last detail. He'd burst into the workshop like a little hurricane. He saw the car, froze for a second, and then his face lit up with a joy so pure, so real, it made my own eyes sting. He wrapped his skinny arms around my neck and whispered right in my ear, "Grandpa, you're a magician." A magician? I gave a bitter smile and set the car down on the workbench. There's a canyon between magician and the guy who fixes things. A canyon I'd somehow failed to notice. When did it happen? When did the magic turn into a chore? When did the miracle become an obligation? Memory is a merciless judge. It dredged up one recollection after another, each one a punch to the gut. Here it is, midnight. I'm standing right here in this garage, with only the light over the workbench on. On the floor is the dismantled wheel of Leo's bike. He'd taken a curb too hard the day before and bent the rim into a figure 8. He'd cried as if the world was ending. I'd put him to bed, promising that everything would be fine in the morning, and I sat here until 3 in the morning, skinning my knuckles, patiently, spoke by spoke, truing that damn wheel. In the morning, he ran out to the porch and saw his bike, good as new. He didn't even ask how it happened. He just jumped on it and rode off, yelling a thanks over his shoulder. For him, it was a given, a scheduled miracle, and another one. Sarah's 15. First boyfriend, first love, first betrayal. She'd locked herself in her room and was howling into her pillow. Mike wasn't in the picture yet, and I was the only man in the house. I didn't know the right words to say. I'm no good with words, anyway. I just brought a chair, set it outside her door, and sat down. I sat there for an hour, 2, in silence, just so she'd know she wasn't alone. The door finally opened. She came out, her face swollen from crying, sat on the floor next to me, and put her head on my lap. I just stroked her hair. I couldn't fix her broken heart with words, but I could be there, a solid, silent wall to lean on. I guess that was also part of my job description as the fixer, fixing souls, no charge and no days off. The bitterest memory surfaced last. 5 years ago, Sarah and Mike wanted to buy a house. They were short on the down payment. They walked around moping, whispering in corners. I could see how much it was eating at them. So I did what I thought was right. I sold my fishing boat, the Martha, my escape, my connection to her. We'd spent so many happy days on that boat. I told them I was getting too old for fishing anyway, that my back was acting up. I lied. I gave them every penny, to the last cent. They took it, thanked me, of course, and bought the very house where I was now, just the guy who fixes things. If I'd known then that I wasn't just selling a boat, but the last remnants of my own life, maybe I wouldn't have been so generous. But I was a father. I was a grandfather. I was doing my duty. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen lit up. Sarah. One call. A second. A third. I stared at the glowing rectangle as if it were a venomous snake. Each vibration sent a pang of pain through my chest. She probably wanted to know why I'd left without staying to the end. She wanted me to say it was all right, that I just had a headache. She wanted me to put everything back in its comfortable, predictable place. I hit the ignore button. Then I turned off the sound. I wasn't angry. Anger is too hot, too alive a feeling. What I felt was cold. It was exhaustion, a deep, cosmic exhaustion with my role. The role of the dependable, convenient old man who was always there to help. I stood up and walked to the lathe. I took the old canvas cover and slowly draped it over the machine. Then another over the drill press. Then the table saw, as if I were burying old friends. I walked out of the garage and, for the first time in years, locked it with the big barn lock. I put the key on a shelf in the entryway. I didn't want to go back in there. My sanctuary had become a mausoleum for my hopes. The days flowed by like thick molasses, slow, gray, tasteless. My world had shrunk to the dimensions of my house and backyard. I stopped waiting, stopped listening for the sound of a car pulling up. I had built a cocoon of silence around myself. I performed my rituals mechanically, brewing coffee, reading yesterday's news in the local paper, watching the squirrels chase each other up the trunk of the old oak tree. But the soul had gone out of these actions. This was existence, not life. The phone had all but fallen silent. Sarah, apparently, had decided I was pouting like a child and that it was best to give me time to cool off. It was her favorite tactic. Ignore a problem in the hope that it would disappear on its own. She didn't understand that this time, the problem wouldn't disappear. The problem was me. On Saturday morning, as I was sitting in my rocking chair on the porch, her car slowly pulled into my gravel driveway. I didn't move. Nothing stirred inside me. No joy, no annoyance. Just a fact. Like rain or the sunrise. She got out, carrying a large glass container in front of her like a shield. A lasagna glowed appetizingly red inside it. Her instrument of reconciliation. How many times had she brought me this lasagna after some minor argument, or when she felt guilty for not having called for weeks? "Hi, Dad." Her voice was deliberately cheerful, as fake as a $3 bill. "I made you some lasagna. Your favorite. I figured you were probably starving yourself here all alone." I nodded silently in greeting. She put the container on the small table next to me, avoiding my eyes. She scanned the yard. "The lawn's getting a little long. Is the mower broken? Need a hand?" "No." My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Just haven't gotten around to it." "Oh." She drew out the word. "Well, okay. Dad, what's going on? Why aren't you answering your phone?" "We were worried. Leo had his piano recital last Sunday. He was really waiting for you. He asked where Grandpa Frank was at least 5 times. Slowly, with an effort, I turned my head and looked at her. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at my little girl, but at a strange woman. A woman who hadn't come to understand, but to accuse. To accuse me of disrupting her peace of mind. I was busy, I lied. It was the easiest way out. Busy? She raised her eyebrows in disbelief. Dad, what could you possibly be so busy with that you can't answer a phone call? We're family. If something's bothering you, you can just talk about it. Family? What an empty word. It rattled in the air like a cracked bell. I heard what Leo said at school, I said flatly, without any expression. She frowned, trying to remember. Then her face slowly changed. Realization, mixed with annoyance. Oh, for God's sake, Dad. Don't tell me you're making this whole drama out of that. He's a kid. He said it without thinking. He's 10. I'm 68, I answered just as flatly. And to me, it's not a small thing. But it's complete nonsense. Her voice began to rise. She was going on the offensive. You know perfectly well how much he adores you. He didn't know how to explain to his friends what a cool grandpa he has. One who can build a spaceship with his own 2 hands if he wants to. He's proud of you. He didn't say my cool grandpa. He said the guy who just fixes things. And that's the whole difference, Sarah. The difference between a person and an object. What the hell difference does it make? She threw up her hands, her face flushing. You're splitting hairs like a spoiled child, instead of being happy that your grandson needs you. You've locked yourself up in here like a hermit and thrown a world-class pity party. He was hurt, by the way, that you weren't at his recital. The second blow. The finisher. A child's ignorance is one thing, but this was a direct invalidation. An accusation that my feelings were foolish, selfish, a whim. She wasn't defending her son. She was defending her comfortable world, where her old father is a dependable machine that has no right to malfunction. Something inside me snapped, the last thin thread. He was hurt, I repeated slowly, my voice ringing with ice. I see, so his feelings matter. But mine don't. My feelings are a drama and a pity party. I get it. I'm just a part, a tool. I'm not supposed to feel. I'm supposed to function. And you didn't come here to talk. You came here to do maintenance. To shake me, oil me, threaten me, and get me back in working order. She recoiled, as if from a slap. She had never heard such words from me. Dad, you're saying horrible things. I'm saying what I think, Sarah. For the first time in a very long time. Maybe my whole life. That's selfishness, she blurted out, and the word was her last bullet. Pure selfishness. To think only of yourself and your stupid hurt feelings when your only grandson is involved. I stared at her for a long time, without blinking, at her red, angry face, and I felt nothing for her but an icy pity. Selfishness? I nodded in agreement. Maybe. Let's do the math. 42 years at the plant so you would want for nothing. 17 years without a vacation to build this house. I sold the Martha, the only thing that connected me to your mother, so you and Mike could buy your little love nest. For the last 6 years, I've lived by your schedule. Your calls, Leo's problems, your requests. I gave you everything I had. My time, my strength, my hands, my soul. I didn't ask for a medal. I thought I'd earned at least a little respect. Not as a handyman, but as a father, as a human being. But I was wrong. My place is in the toolbox. Thank you for making that so clear to me. I got up from the chair. My old knees creaked, but I stood straight. Thanks for the lasagna. You can take it with you. I don't have an appetite. I think it's time for you to go. She stared at me with wide eyes, a mixture of fear and anger in them. She saw a stranger, and she didn't like this stranger. He was inconvenient. "Fine," she hissed through her teeth, grabbing the container. "Have it your way. Sit here and wallow in your pride. Just don't be surprised when everyone really does forget about you." She turned and almost ran to her car. She slammed the door so hard that the old oak tree shuddered. I watched her go until her car turned into a dot and disappeared around the bend. "Don't be surprised when everyone forgets about you." She thought it was a threat. She didn't understand that it was a promise of freedom. I went back to my rocking chair. The silence that surrounded me was no longer an enemy. It had become my home, my fortress. Another week passed, then a second. I was living in my cocoon, and I liked it. I stopped feeling guilty about the silence. On the contrary, I savored it. I mowed the lawn when I felt like it, not when I should. I sat for hours on the porch, watching the ants build their city at the base of the old oak. I felt free from expectations, from requests, from the other people's lives I had serviced for so long. One day, while sorting through old papers in a dresser, I came across a folder of documents. The deed to the house, old tax receipts, the building plan, papers that smelled of dust and the past, and among them, the will. Martha and I had drawn it up about 10 years ago. It was simple and obvious. After we were both gone, everything went to Sarah, our only daughter. At the time, it had seemed like the only right thing to do. I stared at my signature on the document for a long time. Frank Miller. The signature of a man who built, created, gave. A man who believed that his legacy was not just walls and a roof, but the love that had been poured into them. And now I understood that I was leaving the house to people who saw it only as convenient real estate, and its creator as merely the maintenance staff. There was no anger in me at that moment. There was a cold, crystalline clarity, like the frosty air after a storm. I had spent my whole life giving, and now I had the right to decide who would receive my last, most important gift. I found the number for Jim Riley, the lawyer, in an old address book. We had played baseball together on the high school team half a century ago. I dialed the number. Jim Riley's office. "Jim, it's Frank Miller. Still remember a guy by that name?" There was a pause on the other end, then a surprised laugh. "Frank? Hell, of course I remember you. It's been 1,000 years. How's life, old-timer?" "It's flowing along, Jim. Listen, I need to see you about something. Regarding my will." "Of course. Come on by anytime. I'll be happy to see you." His office was in the same old red brick building downtown. Jim had gone gray, gotten a bit of a belly, and wore glasses now, but his handshake was still as firm as a vice grip. We hugged, talked about the old days, about who was still around and who was gone. And then I laid the old will on his desk. "I want to change everything," I said without preamble. Jim looked at me carefully over his glasses. "Something serious, Frank?" "Life, Jim. Just life. I don't want to leave the house to my daughter anymore." "To whom then?" he asked cautiously. I thought for a second, though the answer was already prepared. "I want the house to be sold at auction. And the money? Let the money go to a good cause. Half to the local animal shelter. The other half to the Veterans Assistance Fund. Those guys know what duty means. And dogs don't betray you." Jim was silent for a long time, drumming his fingers on the desk. Then he nodded. "It's your right, Frank. Have you given it a good thought?" "Better than I've thought about anything in a long time," I answered. When I walked out of his office with a copy of the new document in my pocket, I felt an incredible lightness, as if a huge, invisible sack I'd been carrying my whole life had finally fallen from my shoulders. This wasn't revenge. This was an act of justice. I had cut the last thread, my fortress, my labor, my home. It would serve those who truly needed help and protection, not those who took everything for granted. When I got back, I didn't go into the house. I stopped at the garage door. The lock, covered in a rusty film, looked alien. I found the key on the shelf in the entryway. It was cold and dusty. With some effort, I turned it in the keyhole and opened the door. A musty smell hit my nostrils. Dust shimmered in the sunbeams, piercing through the grimy window. The canvas shrouds on the machines made the workshop look like a tomb. I walked over and, with a sharp tug, pulled the cover off the lathe, then off the drill press. Dust billowed into the air. I flicked the light switch. The fluorescent lamps flickered and came on, flooding everything with a harsh, merciless light. My workshop, my soul. I walked to the workbench. There, in the corner, stood the lonely little car with the name Leo. I picked it up. It no longer burned with pain. Now it was just an artifact from a past life, a witness to an era that was over. Next to it lay an untouched block of cherry wood. I had bought it once on a whim, just because it was beautiful. I picked it up, feeling its density, its smoothness, its living warmth. I turned on the lathe. The hum, even and powerful, filled the garage, pushing out the silence and the dust. I secured the block and picked up a chisel. My hands remembered everything. Shavings flew in all directions, smelling of the forest and of life. I worked for several hours, losing all track of time. I thought of nothing. There was only me, the hum of the machine, and the wood that yielded to my will. It was better than prayer. It was a conversation with myself, in the only language I knew perfectly. I wasn't fixing. I was creating. When I turned off the machine, a bird stood on the workbench, an eagle or a falcon. I wasn't sure myself. With powerful, outstretched wings, its head proudly turned to the side. It was ready for flight. I sanded it for a long time until the wood gleamed with deep, fiery hues. I placed it on the most prominent shelf. It was the first thing I had made for myself. Only for myself. In the last 30 years or so. I looked around the workshop. It was no longer a mausoleum. It had become my sanctuary again. But now, it was the sanctuary of my newfound freedom. Life found a new rhythm, the rhythm of my tools. Every morning, I went to the workshop not out of duty, but because my soul called me there. I cleared it of dust and junk. I oiled every mechanism. I started carving small figurines, a bear, a wolf, a fox. They lined up on the shelf next to my eagle, a silent wooden army guarding my new borders. I even started repairing the old rowboat that had been rotting in the backyard for years. Not for fishing, just to keep my hands and mind busy. One afternoon, as I was rubbing oil into another plank for the boat, I heard a knock. Not on the house door, on the side door of the garage. I froze. No one ever came here. No one. The knock came again, timid but persistent. Wiping my hands on a rag, I slowly walked over and opened the door. Leo was standing on the threshold. He seemed to have grown up in these few weeks, or maybe I'd just gotten out of the habit of seeing him. He stood there, shifting from foot to foot, not daring to look up at me. He was clutching a worn-out school backpack. "Hi, Grandpa," he mumbled, not raising his eyes. I looked at him in silence. It was quiet and empty inside me. No anger, no joy. "Can I?" he asked, nodding toward the workshop. I silently stepped aside. He walked in and stopped in the middle of the clean, transformed space. His gaze darted to the shelf with the figurines, to the disassembled boat, to to the tools gleaming with oil. He was like a foreigner in a familiar but unrecognizable country. "It's different in here," he said finally. "I cleaned up," I answered simply. "Mom said—" "She said you were busy," he stammered. "I am busy. I have a lot of work to do." He finally looked up at me. There was no childish resentment in his eyes, but a kind of adult bewilderment and something else. Guilt. "Grandpa, I know you heard everything. At school, I know you left because of me." He took a deep breath. "Mom yelled at me at first, a lot, and then she cried. I've never seen her cry before, and I realized I had done something really bad." He looked at me directly. This was no longer that carefree boy. "I didn't mean it," his voice trembled. "I didn't think those words were like that. It's just those guys. Their dads are lawyers, businessmen. They were bragging, and I didn't know what to say. To say that my grandpa is the best machinist in the world? They would have laughed. So I said what I thought sounded cool, that you can fix anything in the world. I thought it was like a superpower. I didn't know it would sound like you were a thing. Forgive me." I listened to him, and the ice in my soul seemed to crack. Not because of his apology, but because of his honesty. For the first time, he was trying not to make excuses, but to understand. At that moment, the old me, the Frank before the school gym, should have hugged him and said, "It's all right, kid. I'm not angry. Put everything back in its place." But the old Frank was gone. I walked to the workbench and picked up that first wooden car. I set it on the table. "You explained everything, Leo," I said quietly but firmly. "And I understood everything. I'm not angry anymore. It's the truth." I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm just learning to be nobody. For you all. And you know, it's not so bad. It's even peaceful. When you're nobody, nobody expects anything from you, and you don't owe anyone anything." I could see the confusion in his eyes. He had expected forgiveness and a hug, and instead he got the cold, adult truth. He silently took off his backpack, set it on the floor, and pulled out something wrapped in an old t-shirt. It was the castle. One of the towers had broken off, and the drawbridge was hanging by a single thread. "It broke," Leo said quietly. "I wanted to fix it, but I couldn't." He waited for me to get the glue, the tools, and make it right. I picked up the broken tower, turned it over in my hands, and held it out to him. "The wood glue is in the blue can. The clamps are on the wall. You know how to use them. I showed you." He looked confusedly from the tower to me. "Me? By myself." "By yourself," I nodded. "It's your castle." I turned away and went back to my boat. I didn't leave. I was there, but I was no longer the one doing the work. He stood there for a long time, hesitating. Then he slowly walked to the table. His hands were shaking. He awkwardly spread the glue, attached the tower. He picked up a heavy clamp and tried to secure it. He grunted, huffed, and got glue on his fingers. But he was doing it himself. A working silence settled in the workshop. The creak of his clamp and the rustle of my sandpaper. It was a new kind of music. When he finished with the castle, he came over to me again. "Grandpa, I brought something else." He pulled that same maple car I had given him long ago from his backpack. I kind of fixed it too." He held it out to me. I took it in my hands and saw that something on the smooth roof had changed. There was an inscription, awkwardly carved, it seemed, with the tip of a compass. The letters danced, but I could read them. "Made with Grandpa. Not made by Grandpa, but made with Grandpa. I stared at the inscription for a long time. Then I looked at my grandson. He stood there, biting his lip, waiting for the verdict. I reached out and ruffled his hair. "Good job," I said. And for the first time in a long time, my voice didn't creak. "But next time, use the wood burner. It'll be cleaner. It's in the top drawer. You can have it." I smiled for the first time in many weeks. This wasn't the old life, but it was a new, more honest blueprint. And this time, it seemed, we were going to build it together, but by my rules.